In this webinar series, I'm going to cover paid time off, PTO, or vacation, or leaves as they call it, depending on which part of the world you're tuning in from. And the topics that I'm going to cover in the webinar are the different types of PTO, whether you need to pick a days or an hours. I'll give you examples of the most popular PTO types that we've seen in our product in the last 10 years, pros and cons of the different types of PTO and what you should look out for while designing your PTO policy. And very quickly, I will also show you on our ClockIt PTO feature um, how you can set up these different types of PTO so that it makes your PTO tracking, vacation tracking, and accruals fully automated, with the employees being able to apply or request for PTO using the mobile apps or the web. So let's jump right in. And the first topic that we are going to cover is, do you need an hourly PTO or does the day PTO make sense? Both are very popular in our system. We've seen multiple customers go with the hours and the other half go with days. So there's no one size fits all. I would say it's pretty equal when customers pick either one. Let's look at what the hours PTO mean. So if you hand out, let's say, as an example, 20 hours of PTO for the first year, that means the employee gets hours into their PTO bank. And if you do the days, then you can do 5 days of PTO or 1 week of sick PTO per employee for the entire year. These are the two different types. Now, where does it come into effect in your PTO policy? Let's say, for example, you do the hourly PTO. In that case, an employee applies for, let's say, 5 hours or 3 hours of PTO, or technically, if they take the entire day, it's going to be in a typical scenario, it's going to be an 8-hour PTO for the day. If your payroll depends on the PTO hours, then by all means pick the hourly PTO. Another example, let's say you do 40 hours a week and the next week you would like to take a PTO. So would you apply for 40 hours of sick day? That means you're technically off for the entire week. So then in your payroll, you would have it computed that you worked for 40 hours on the first week, and the next week you have a 40-hour sick PTO, and in total that works out to be 80 hours in your payroll. Now this is a good example when you need to pick hours as against days. If you go with days, then let's say I apply for 5 days of PTO in my payroll report, I would still get to see 40 hours of work done during the first week, and in the second week I'm going to see 5 days. Now, how do you translate that 5 days into hours? If you do not do that part in your payroll, then by all means pick the days PTO and it will work out perfectly for you. We do have a feature which cross-checks the day PTO with your schedule and computes the hours as well. So just in case you need to go with days, but you also need the computed hours in your payroll, we do that also. So in conclusion, I would say pick the hours PTO if your payroll heavily depends on the hours computation and for the pay, and go with the days PTO if you would just like to keep a record of when employees are off, and that works out perfectly over there. The next bit is going to be the most common type of PTO that we've seen in ClockIt is 2 to 3 weeks of vacation days, and these are handed out to the employee in either every 2 weeks. Basically, they accrue every 2 weeks, they accrue monthly, or they accrue annually. All three are very popular. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. This completely depends on your internal policy. I'll very quickly touch on what these mean as well. A 2-week PTO, I'll give it with an example. Let's say to keep it simple, let's say I have 12 hours of PTO for the year, and every 2 weeks means every 2 weeks as they pass, I get 0.5 hours into my PTO bank, and that accrues over the weeks, and by the end of the year, I have my 12 hours. It's a similar concept for days also. And if you do a monthly or an annually, in monthly, you get one PTO per month, and for annually, you get all the 12 days or hours upfront. So that's how the accrual bit works. The vacation PTO generally is you're allowed to carry forward because these are paid. I've also seen a lot of instances where if an employee has PTO balance remaining, they're allowed to cash out at the end of the year or the work anniversary, depending on the way you set it. Just a careful consideration over here is when you set up your PTO for the vacation, make sure you set a max limit. What this means is that if in the previous example, I'll go back to the same, let's say as an employee, I'm allowed to take 12 days of vacation days in a year, and I'm allowed to carry forward unlimited PTO to the next year. How many years are you going to allow me to carry this forward? Does it mean by the end of 5 years, I have 40 hours of PTO and I can take them all out at once? Our recommendation and what we've seen on the platform is employees are restricted to a maximum of 2 to 3 years before which they start losing that PTO. So they need to use up that PTO before it's done. I'll just show you a very quick example of how this vacation days or hours is set up in ClockIt. I go into company leaves, PTO, and accrual setup. And what I can do is I can call this, let me call this vacation, and just put the same name in. It's a description for my internal views. And let's say I would like to have this in days. So I'm allowed to take, let's say 10 days for this example. I will just give a short name to it. It applies to both. There's no file attachment needed for this. Visibility, I can show the leave balance to the employees. The duration, yes, it has to be applied during the current year. Deduction, this is typically off. The balance, allow negative leave balance is, now this is an interesting one. Let's say as an employee in February, I would like to apply for PTO. Do you want me to have the option to apply for all my 12 days in February? Or do I have to wait until I have the PTO days in my bank? If you allow negative, I will technically be allowed to apply for the PTO. My PTO balance goes negative, and as the months go by, I would accrue that, and eventually I get a positive number into my PTO balance. The only risk over here is, let's say an employee uses up all their PTO, and then for whatever reason they decide to leave your company. Then what do you do with the excess PTO that's taken? I've seen companies typically do a deduction of final pay and the final settlement, and that's the way they deal with this scenario. In this case, I will allow the negative leave balance, and I would like to hand it out monthly. And we also support PTO based on the work number of years of experience that you have. And in this example, for all employees, it's going to be 12 days. If I would like to give extra number of days for employees that have been with the organization for longer, let's say after 3 years, you get 24. This is just for simplicity, and I can add that in. And I'm going to say accrue at the beginning of the month. My carry forward is unlimited rollover. And I would like to hand this PTO out during the calendar year and not work anniversary for this particular type. There's no probation period over here, and I can just go ahead and save this. Now, when I save this and I come into my vacation and leaves account or profile, I would be able to see the vacation days that is set up, and I have 24 days over here. This is because my joining date or date of hire is more than 3 years. I've been with the company for longer than 3 years, and that's the reason I see 24 days. If I click on the 24 days, I can also see how I have accrued the PTO over the months, and you would have an entire list. Now, let's go back into the PTO types. So that's all about the vacation days. This vacation type is the most popular that I've seen with ClockIt, and I thought I'd spend a few minutes to speak about this. The next one is sick days. When you set up your sick day policy, the most common example I've seen is 1 week of sick days. So it can be either 40 hours or it can be either 12, it can be just 5 or 7 days if you take into account the weekends. A sick day typically accrues annually. It's set as use it or lose it. So employees, if they have a balance and they've not used it for the entire, they have options to either cash out or they're going to lose the entire balance at the end of the year. And generally, companies also like to take a medical note or a medical certificate at the time of applying for this PTO, so you can make sure that it's a legit request. Let me just set up the sick days on ClockIt. So this time I will do the hours just for the example. Let me come into vacation and accrual setup. I am located in a different site, so I'm going to create a new one, and let me call this sick days. I'll give it the same name, and I'm going to set up, let's just call it SD. It's available to both, and this time I'm going to requires file attachment, show the leave balance to the employees. It has to be applied during current reason. I will also do, in case the admin unapproves the request, there has to be a reason for unapproval. I'm going to enable that. Allow negative leave balance for this type. Typically, no, they don't allow it. And I'm going to do accrual is this time going to be annually. And for everyone in the organization, I'm going to give this as, let me put this to hours. And I'm going to say everyone gets, let's say, 40 hours in this case. And I'm going to add that in. I did do 3. Let me just set that to 0. Okay, so there we go. Accrue at the beginning. Rollover is a 0 rollover. Carry forward is going to be during the calendar year. You can do work anniversary as well. I'm going to do January to December, and probation is 0. Now, if I go ahead and save this, and then I come and look into my vacation and leaves, and I look at my balance now. So I have 40 hours of sick days set up over here. So now I have one leave type in sick days and in hours, and I have the other one in days. Let's go back to our slides. So that's all about sick days. Another popular category that shows up on our dashboards, which a lot of companies are using, is the unlimited PTO. In my experience, it is it's a wow factor when you say that you allow your employees to have unlimited PTO for your employees. But what we've also seen with our internal data is employees take way lesser days when you have an unlimited PTO. And let me tell you the logic behind this. When you have a PTO type, which is limited, which is a specific bank, let's say 24 days or 1 week of sick, and employees, when they see it, when they see it on their profile, they're entitled to that balance, and they simply go and apply for it. When you have an unlimited PTO policy, an employee always has to request for the PTO, get an approval either from the admins or the managers, and it's only after the approval that they get to take that PTO. In my opinion, so there is a higher resistance to apply for that PTO as against if you already can see your PTO balance on your account and then go ahead and use it. I'll just very quickly jump into the account once again. Let's go into PTO accruals, and this time I will set up an unlimited PTO. So let's say I call this unlimited PTO, and I'm going to call the same thing over here. And let's say it's going to be in days. Let's call it UPTO, available to both, no attachments, and the visibility. And this time I'm not going to show the balance to the user because technically it does not make sense. And duration, let it be, it does not matter, so they can apply for it anytime. Deduction does not matter. Allow negative balance needs to be turned on. And this you can set it up to anything because you're allowing negatively bound. So technically it means that they can take any amount out. I'll set the start year as 2024. Again, number of years, it's available to everyone. So I'll go ahead and set a higher than usual value, let's say 100. I'm just going to keep that there. And accrue at the beginning, carry forward is going to be, you can again do it limited because you're allowing, do it as 0 because you're allowing negative rebalance. Carry forward is going to be during the calendar year. I'm going to set this up as January, and then I can click Save. Now, if I come into my settings and I look at vacation and leave, you will see that there is no PTO balance because technically there is no balance. But in my drop-down, I should be able to see it. Oh, I think I made a mistake somewhere, so let me just go back. Oh, I added it to the main account, so I'll open an account for one of the other users that belongs to this site. And I go to vacation and leaves. And now if you look under the PTO, you would see unlimited PTO, which I can go ahead and apply for. But in the PTO list, it's displayed over here, but I can just go ahead and turn it off. So I go into PTO accrual setup. Let me just check the settings very quickly. I'm going to do an edit. And unlimited PTO, allow negative rebalance. And I'm going to turn this off. Okay, and I'll save this. Now, if I go into the same employee profile, technically I should not be able to see it. So there we go, the vacation unlimited is missing in the balance, but in the dropdown, you will be able to apply for it. And this is the one. So you would be able to apply for it from here. So now let's move on to the next slide, adjusting PTO manually. Now, when you come into ClockIt, let's say from a spreadsheet or from another tool, the chances are that you're bringing in some previous balance that an employee has, and you can adjust the balance. And this is not only with ClockIt, but rather any tool or any system that you're using, but you just need to have a policy in place as to how you would like to adjust the balances. In our experience, we've also seen that if an employee joins mid-year and the accrual period for the rest of the users is running as usual, then the number of days gets prorated. And a good example would be, let's say, 1 day of PTO per month. The employee joins on the sixth month, then they get 6 days of PTO for the rest of the year. If they are coming in from another platform and they already have some amount of balance, then you just need to adjust it out for them. With our product or within ClockIt, what you can do is we have the option to go to an employee account. Let me just very quickly show you this. I have vacation and leaves, and let's say I have 24 days of vacation and I need to add in 4 more days to that. The simplest way to do this is I can just give a reason as to why I'm doing it, and I'm going to add 4 days of vacation, and I'm going to say which date it's available from, and I can just add that in. And once that's done, you would be able to see that the PTO has become 28 days because I was able to adjust it out. I've also seen many instances where the adjustment is done for another totally different reason. Let's say some of your employees take work an extra day on a weekend or so. You need to either compensate for them with an additional vacation day, or you can do a compensation with pay. Now, if you're doing a compensation with a vacation day or any kind of PTO days that they may have, the entitlement is a good way to do this. And The last bit that we would be talking about is tracking days or hours outside of the PTO. Now, I've had a couple of calls with customers this last 2 weeks, and some of the questions that came up was, what happens if an employee has worked for an extra hour? Then how would you like to compensate them? It's the same thing which I spoke about earlier. What you can do is you can use the entitlements to give them an extra day or PTO hours over there, or if you would like to compensate them with pay, even that's up to you. You can design your PTO policy accordingly. Another question that a customer came and asked me last week was, what if an employee does not take their lunch hour and they work through it, but they would like to leave early for the day? That's totally fine, because the work duration is computed any which ways, and but the customer wanted to have an option to track these days. So in this case, what we asked them to do was to set up a PTO type which was hidden. You don't need to show the balance. You allow the negative leave balance, and every time an employee goes an hour early or 2 hours early because they've made up for their shift probably on some of the day or they've not taken their lunch break, you can just go ahead and apply for that PTO so that there's a record of it. It has an unlimited balance, and the admin and the manager can approve that, and there's a record for it when you do your payroll. The other option is also that you can use the entitlements to make these adjustments, and that would also work perfectly fine. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. This is the end of the webinar. I would love to hear your feedback. I would love to even hear if there are any special types of PTO that you're using so that I can cover all of these in the next webinar. And feel free to reach out to us on the ClockIt website. We are available at the bottom right on the chat of the website. My name is Basil. I'm the founder with ClockIt, and we help companies do payroll in 5 minutes. That's all for now.